Wow, thanks for coming, everybody. Look at all this. Oh, my God. Okay, we're here. Thank you, Jake. Thank you, Ted. And welcome. Welcome to Shakespeare's Treason. We'll go to part one. Truth. George Bernard Shaw said, "All great truths begin as blasphemy." And this Stanford professor, Albert Joseph Girard, he warned his students that when you seek a new path to truth, you must expect to find it blocked by expert opinion. Well, my name is Hank Whittemore, and I'm here to tell you an amazing story which I believe is absolutely true. Now, for 25 years, I've been living a kind of double life. On the surface, I've had a reasonably normal existence as an actor and a writer and a newspaper man, investigative reporter, book author. And then I've had another less visible life, doggedly pursuing the truth of a mysterious book. And I think I found it. I think I found that true story, which I would like to share with you now. The journey's not over. Only time is going to tell how much truth I found. But I do know a couple of things already. My path is certainly being blocked by expert opinion. And so far, everything I have discovered is blasphemy. Oh, one more. Truth is truth to the end of reckoning. That's William Shakespeare. History. Pardon me. A little louder, he wants it. Okay, history. Napoleon said history is a myth that men agree to believe. And it was George Orwell who said history is written by the winners. He wrote that in a British newspaper article in 1944, when the outcome of World War II was not necessarily a sure thing. Orwell's point was that if the Germans win the war, it's going to be a very different story about how it all began and why. No kidding. Well, 1944, I was 4 years old. I couldn't read that newspaper article, but something did happen in my life when I was 7. And in a strange way, it's why I'm standing here right now. It kind of proved Orwell's point. We lived in Mamaroneck, New York, in a house with a fairly good-sized brook. It was across the street, down an embankment. And one day we were playing down in the brook. We were building rafts out of old boards and tire tubes. And some kid yelled out, "Get the bamboo pole." And I raced up the embankment, right, to get the bamboo pole and bolted right into the side of a moving truck. And I wound up in New Rochelle Hospital for 6 weeks. I was up in a room alone, covered almost entirely with bandages, and every night I was screaming my head off with nightmares. And pretty soon there was a team of doctors and nurses and a big huddle with my parents and my grandparents. And they finally decided that the reason for my nightmares was the Batman and Superman comic books that I was reading. My one pleasure. Well, I argued with them, and they were bigger than I was, and they won that argument, and they took away my comic books, and I stopped having nightmares. That's it. Yeah, that's the history. That's the official Whittemore history. It was told every year, year after year at the Thanksgiving table. My grandfather would give thanks for our many blessings, including my survival from the truck accident, followed by the story of how the grown-ups cured my nightmares. And it was a great story. I loved hearing it. But it wasn't true. Truth is, I was really miserable about losing my comic books. Everybody on the whole floor knew it. The next day, Nurse Bennett came in. She was wheeling a side table with a stack of Little Lulu comic books piled underneath. She explained to me that the little girl across that hall had heard about my plight and donated all her Little Lulus. Well, I was a grown-up 7-year-old boy. I wasn't about to humiliate myself by reading girl stuff, so I turned up my nose at him. But later, after Nurse Bennett left, I got bored. I got really bored, and so I picked up the first one and opened the cover. Batman, the Revenge of the Joker. My heart was pounding. I picked up the next one, opened it up. Superman. That little girl, she'd gotten hold of all my comic books before they could be thrown out, and she had put them inside all these little Lulu covers. Let me put this back on. And while adjusting my microphone, I could read all these comic books. I could read Superman and Batman without anybody knowing it. I never, ever corrected the official version. I enjoyed hearing it every Thanksgiving. And besides, I think I knew even then, this was history written by the winners. Thank you. The true history was different. Orwell was right. So the story I'm going to tell you right now, the winners never told it. They never told the story I'm going to tell you right now. The true story of King Henry IX, last of the Tudors. Who's King Henry IX? You mean, yeah, okay, there was no Henry IX. See what I mean? Blocked by expert opinion. All right, okay, well, here's a little bit of Tudor history I learned in high school. The Tudor dynasty was started in, 1487, 1485, and it was Henry VII, and it spanned 118 years to the death of Queen Elizabeth I in 1603. Henry VII was followed by his son Henry VIII, who was followed in turn by his 3 surviving children. There was the sickly boy king, Edward VI, died at the age of 15. There was the Catholic Queen Mary. She was known as Bloody Mary for burning Protestants at the stake. And then, of course, there was little Princess Elizabeth. She was 3 years old when her monstrosity of a father executed her mother, Anne Boleyn, by slicing off her head. Yeah, it's like The Sopranos. They weren't even Italian. Elizabeth Tudor. She was 25 when she came to the throne, ruled as an absolute monarch for 4.5 decades, died at 69. Pretty old for those days. She had many different personas. She was Venus, the sex-crazed goddess of love and beauty. And she was also Diana, the chaste goddess of the moon. She was Marilyn Monroe and Mother Teresa both at once. Talk about a double life. And of course, she was also and famously the legendary Virgin Queen. Never married, never gave birth, so she left no heir, no successor by blood. And when she died, the House of Tudor collapsed. James Stuart, King of Scotland, became King James I of England, and the Stuart dynasty began. So according to the official recorded history, this title here is wrong. Elizabeth was the last of the Tudors. There was no Henry IX, right? But wait. The secret book. 1609, 6 years after Elizabeth died, a certain book is being secretly printed in London. Excuse me. This book told a very different history than the one my teachers told me. This book reported that Elizabeth had not been the chaste virgin queen. This book reported she had a child. And I know, a child. It's blasphemy. And it told the story of a young prince who was the unacknowledged son of the queen. It told how this young prince had tried to overthrow the government and failed, and told how he was arrested and put into the Tower of London and charged with high treason. Told how he was tried, convicted, sentenced to die by that most grotesque form of execution, drawing and quartering. And it told how at the very last moment the queen intervened with her son to save her son's life. And it led to the inescapable conclusion that the queen's powerful secretary, Robert Cecil, plotted behind Elizabeth's back to hold that young man hostage in the Tower until she died. And then he, Cecil, could bring James of Scotland to the throne as King of England. And then, after pledging lifelong silence, the prince would be set free and given a royal pardon. Now, this was one hot book. I mean, after all, it was claiming that the King of Scotland had stolen the throne of England from a true and rightful English heir, a prince who deserved by blood to succeed Elizabeth, and this rightful heir was still very much alive. This book could start a civil war. This book was treason. It was kind of a diary. It read like a series of private letters, most written directly to the young prince. The book was recording the prince's life up to the death of his mother, the queen, and the moment of succession to the throne. The author recorded he was tongue-tied by authority, prevented by the government from telling the truth. Elizabeth and her government had total power of censorship and suppression and imprisonment, torture, even death. And she had made it high treason to even speak or write about any royal claim. He called his book an embassage. That's a secret message intended only for a monarch. An ambassador of the court memorizes this message, and then that's to avoid leaving a paper trail and to give himself deniability. You know, I'm not carrying any message. See here? And then he delivers it to a king or queen in person, orally. But the author of this dangerous book here could not do that. He was confined to words on the page, so it's a written embassage. And he addresses it directly to the young prince as a subject or a vassal, speaking to his monarch. Lord of my love, to whom in vassalage thy merit hath my duty strongly knit, to thee I send this written embassage, to witness duty, not to show my wit, duty so great, which wit so poor as mine may make seem bare, and wanting words to show it. Now, the treasonous book that I'm talking about, Shakespeare's sonnets, never before imprinted. That's a photocopy of the original cover. And if you see down below, publishing date, 1609. Let's see. Shakespeare's part of the title. It's hyphenated, indicating the likelihood of a pen name. And instead of the title, shouldn't it have gone down there and those parallel lines? See there, that space? Shouldn't it have said by William Shakespeare, like that one? That's 1608, in the space between those lines, written by John Day. Or this one here, 1611, in the space between those lines, written by George Chapman. But here, look, they went to the trouble of making the lines. And then they left the space blank. Conspicuously blank. Indicating what? Well, the author's not being identified. In effect, he is invisible. And inside the book, an older man is writing to a younger man, and his consecutively numbered sonnets or little songs, they look like love poems. But in fact, the author is writing to the young prince, whose name he dare not mention, and in the process of sending this embassage to him, he's recording that the prince has true rights to become King of England. Now, these are blood rights. They're traced back through generations of royal lineage, all the way back to God himself, who grants these rights in the first place. And these rights are very important to this poet. But why? Well, in the first place, he's worried. He's worried that people in the future are not going to realize what he is talking about. Sonnet 17. Who will believe my verse in time to come if it were filled with your most high deserts? Though yet heaven knows it is but as a tomb which hides your life and shows not half your parts. If I could write the beauty of your eyes, and in fresh numbers number all your graces, the age to come would say, this poet lies. Such heavenly touches ne'er touched earthly faces. So should my papers, yellowed with their age, be scorned like old men of less truth than tongue, and your true rights be termed a poet's rage and stretched meter of an antique song. Well, these sonnets are generally seen as very emotional love poems. So he is right to worry that he's not going to be understood, but he's decided to write something so good it's going to last forever. Sonnet 18. So long as men can breathe or eyes can see, so long lives this, and this gives life to thee. Okay. He is giving life. Sounds like he's giving birth. But to what? Well, to the living record of the young prince. Sonnet 55. Not marble nor the gilded monuments of princes shall outlive this powerful rhyme, but you shall shine more bright in these contents than unswept stone besmeared with sluttish time. When wasteful war shall statues overturn, and broils root out the work of masonry, nor Mars his sword, nor war's quick fire shall burn the living record of your memory. 'Gainst death and all oblivious enmity shall you pace forth. Your praise shall still find room even in the eyes of all posterity that wear this world out to the ending doom. So till the judgment that yourself arise, you live in this and dwell in lover's eyes. Now this living record, this diary of letters to the prince is going to be placed inside of a monument for posterity. It's like the great pyramids of Egypt, those monuments for the pharaohs or the kings. They were built with tombs to preserve them until they attain eternal life. He tells the young prince in Sonnet 81, your monument shall be my gentle verse, which eyes not yet created shall o'erread. So he is building a monument for us, out of words. But how? Double image. all right? To write the truth and conceal it at the same time, the author uses the form of a double image. That's two completely different stories running simultaneously, one fiction, one nonfiction. One talking about matters of the heart, love and sex, jealousy, grief, sadness, and forgiveness. The other talking about blood rights, the coming succession, revolt, treason, prison, ransom, freedom. And to protect the project and his neck, the author does have to have deniability. So he can say, oh, no, I was not writing about any royal prince or with any royal claim. No, this is just ordinary stuff about love and beauty and bright eyes and dark hair. You know, poetry, it's harmless. And we all are familiar with double images. But mostly and usually they're in the form of a picture. You know the picture of the old hag, you look at it a little differently, all of a sudden she's a beautiful young woman, right? It's like that. Or it could be a flock of birds in the sky. And also a school of fish in the water. We could have that picture up on the wall our whole lives. See, only the birds in the sky, never the fish in the water. Until somebody comes along and says, well, look at it from a different angle and see the wings of the birds are also the bodies of the fish. And then, the picture changes. No, you're right. The picture never changes. That stays the same. What changes is the perception of the individual viewer. We see what we expect to see. If we expect to see fish, we see fish. If we expect to see birds, we see birds. If we expect to see romantic poetry, well, that's what we see, romantic poetry. Because the sonnets are universal, timeless love poems. That's the romantic side of the double image. And it is why the sonnets have lasted so long. The author deliberately used all the power of his great mind and heart and talent and skill. He had to make the poems great if they're going to live forever, or at least till eyes not yet created could read them. And it worked. Because probably everybody in this room can quote or at least recognize one or two famous lines. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day, when in disgrace with fortune and men's eyes? Let me not to the marriage of true minds admit impediments. And that one is so romantic, I recited it to my wife at our wedding. When in the chronicle of wasted time, when to the sessions of sweet, silent thought, I summon up remembrance of things past. Now that's great poetry. But these lines, the same lines, are also personal cries from the depths of a man's soul. They are real. They're heartfelt. They're filled with profound spiritual suffering. And here the great poet adopts the personal pronoun, I. Not for a character in a play, but for himself, using his own voice, telling his own story. But what do we know about that story? Not much. He never identifies the real life individuals who are involved. So we have had to come up with fictional nicknames. There's the beloved younger man we call the fair youth. And then there's the author's treacherous mistress we call the dark lady. Oh, and then the other writer nicknamed the rival poet. I'm trying to see how does it go. Author loves fair youth who commits some kind of a crime involving both himself and the dark lady who steals him away, right? And then the other writer, the rival poet, competes with the author successfully for the fair youth's affections, and he too steals him away, right? Author's furious at his mistress. He's jealous of the rival. But he forgives the younger man and promises to make him live forever. That's it. That's what we know. That is the love story. That's the romantic picture of the sonnets, and it's been up on our wall for 400 years. It's time to recognize it is just one half of a double image. The other half looks entirely different. The other half is political. It's filled with royal politics. But I have to admit, at first it may not seem that way. For example, he tells the younger man in Sonnet 20, "A woman's face with nature's own hand painted hast thou, the master, mistress of my passion." Now, that does not sound very political. It sounds romantic. And if it's not a romance, why would the older man call the younger man his master, mistress? And then it must be a gay romance, right? Right. But we can also look at it a little differently, from a different angle. For example, one time in open court, Queen Elizabeth reprimanded the Earl of Leicester for acting like a king. "If you think to rule here, I will have you forthcoming. I will have here but one mistress, no master. One queen, no king." So, it's possible to begin to perceive a series of private letters from a devoted father to his beloved son, who is also his master, or royal prince, reflecting the face of his mother, the queen, the sovereign mistress of England. Master, mistress. And "Shall I compare thee to a summer's day" is also very, very romantic, I know. But what about Richard III? "Now is the winter of our discontent made glorious summer by this son of York." Son of York's a king. Kings are sons. They create golden times of summer days. Tells the younger man early on in Sonnet 3, "This thy golden time." In other words, shall I compare thee to a king? But I'm not trying, don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to suggest that we throw away all that beautiful romantic poetry. I could not do that if I wanted to. I mean, a summer's day, still a summer's day, that can't change. The thing is, Shakespeare was such a brilliant writer. He gave us two entirely separate pictures to look at. And we can flip back and forth whenever we want. But how does he do that? Well, yes, the trick of a double image picture is that every line, both images, every line copies both images at once. I mean, every line follows them, and every one is a complete overlap. And the author of the sonnets tells us this is exactly what he's going to do, and he does. But instead of every line, it's every word. Every word produces two separate overlapping images. For example, the word beauty. On one level for one image is just that, beauty. On the other level for the other image, however, beauty is a word for Queen Elizabeth. As I mentioned, she's not only Diana, the queen, the goddess of chastity. She's also Venus, the goddess of love and beauty, the sexy and sexual goddess of love and beauty. So she had it both ways. And the young prince, her son, then, has inherited this beauty by virtue of having her blood. So when he writes to him about the beauty of your eyes, well, it looks like he's talking strictly about the younger man's physical appearance. But In fact, he's talking about the Tudor blood flowing in his veins, making him a prince, and being then reflected in his eyes. The kid could be ugly as a toad. Yeah, and he could still have this kind of beauty. And with this perception, we can read Beauty's Rose. Realize it's not just a pretty flower, but also Queen Elizabeth's dynasty of the Tudor Rose. We could read Beauty's Successive Heir. Realize it's not just brunettes succeeding blondes to the title of beauty, like my teachers told me. Instead, it also Queen Elizabeth's immediate heir by blood to the throne. I mean, the queen and her blood. They're both love and beauty. So when he tells the younger man, you and love are still my argument, he's referring to you. You and your royal blood, you and your blood from Elizabeth are always my only topic. And he does write only about his royal son, who has a motto, all one, in relation to his mother, the queen, who has a famous motto, ever the same. Why write I still, all one, ever the same? Okay. Why does he do that? Well, because the sonnets are a puzzle, and he has to insert a key so future generations can unlock the truth. And where does he hide it? Well, Polonius in Hamlet says, I will find truth, though it be hid, indeed, within the center. So, sure enough, there it is, right there in the center of the main body of the sonnets, number 76, where the author explains that his invention or trick method of double image writing to his royal son is made possible by the noted weed or familiar costume of poetry, the poetry of love, and that he uses every word of this poetry to almost, but not quite, reveal his own name or identity while recording his son's life from birth to where he and the words of this diary have managed to proceed or grow. Why write I still, all one, ever the same, and keep invention in a noted weed, that every word doth almost tell my name, showing their birth and where they did proceed. He goes on, oh, no, sweet love, I always write of you, and you and love are still my argument. So all my best is dressing old words new. Yeah, dressing old words new. He writes only about his son and the son's blood in relation to the mother. So to create the illusion of variety, he has to keep dressing old words new or exchanging one word for another to mean the same thing. The way, for example, Queen Elizabeth is not only beauty, she's also fortune and heaven and nature and moon. And he never uses the word royal directly. Instead, he uses sweet. I know it may sound like a valentine to a lover, but in the sonnets it also means royal. But he cannot use sweet over and over again. So for royal, he has to use not only sweet, but bright, fair, golden, true, just to name a few. So, here is the full sonnet 76. It's right there in the center of the monument. It's hiding in plain sight, and it's explaining to us how the trick works. Why is my verse so barren of new pride, so far from variation or quick change? Why, with the time, do I not glance aside to newfound methods and to compound strange? Why write I still all one, ever the same, and keep invention in a noted weed, that every word doth almost tell my name, showing their birth and where they did proceed? Oh, no, sweet love, I always write of you and love are still my argument. So all my best is dressing old words new, spending again what is already spent. For as the sun is daily new and old, so is my love still telling what is told. Thank you. Publishing day, 1609, when the sonnets were published. The name William Shakespeare was at the zenith of its popularity. The narrative poems, Venus and Adonis, Rape of Lucrece, they were both published 15 years earlier, both dedicated to the young Earl of Southampton. They're still bestsellers. And of course, the plays being performed over at the Globe are still popular. So popular that at least 1,000 copies of the sonnets were printed. Enough to supply 2 separate bookstalls in London. There was William Astley's over at the sign of the Parrot, and John Wright's over there by the door of Christ Church. I mean, this was going to be a big day in Renaissance publishing history. But because the government had spies everywhere, and because this was a treasonous book, we should not be surprised to learn that the entire printing of 1,000 copies never made it to those bookstalls. It just vanished. There's not a single authentic contemporary record of anyone ever having bought, read, or even heard of this dangerous book. Let me repeat that. There's not a single authentic contemporary record of anyone ever having bought, read, or even heard of this dangerous book. The sonnets went underground for more than a full century, not until 102 years later, in 1711, was the first copy discovered. And since then, 13 copies have been found, all in pristine condition, indicating they've never been read, but instead hidden away. The book, entitled Shakespeare's Sonnets, was set forth in 1609, 400 years ago, more than that, like a message in a bottle. The publication was suppressed by the government, but the bottle was set adrift on the sea of time by history's losers who could only hope it would make its way to the distant shore of posterity, where you and I are, right here, right now. That's the end of part 1. Just a very little bit. Thank you. We're going to go right into it. We're going to go to part 2, the Virgin Queen. What? Yeah. It's a question mark. Okay. All right. First question we have to ask is, was Elizabeth really a virgin? Did she or could she have had a child? And if she did, who was the father? Well, what do we know? In the early years of her reign, the 1560s, Elizabeth carried on a flagrant love affair with Robert Dudley, Earl of Leicester, with whom it was widely assumed she had at least one child. And then in 1571, Parliament passed a brand new law changing the description of any possible successor from the lawful issue of Her Majesty's body to the natural issue of Her Majesty's body. Now, why would they do that? Clearly, Parliament believed the Queen was doing it with somebody. And who am I to argue with Parliament? So much for virginity, and now in plain language, a bastard could be king. Okay. The active sexual affair between Elizabeth and Leicester had ended by 1571, when a young nobleman began a steep rise at court in the highest favor of the 37-year-old, still unmarried queen. This young nobleman courtier was Edward de Vere, 17th Earl of Oxford. He had been a teenage royal ward of the Queen in the custody of her chief minister, William Cecil, most powerful man in England, perhaps even more powerful than the Queen herself, who relied upon him absolutely. Now, Cecil had seen to it that young Oxford studied with the best private tutors. He graduated from Cambridge and Oxford at ages 14 and 16 before studying law at Gray's Inn, and then joining the military campaign against the powerful Catholic earls of the north. And then they were, by the way, wanting to come down and kill Elizabeth and then replace her with Mary, Queen of Scots. So in 1571, he turned 21. And he officially took his place in the adult world. Several events are notable. One, he left wardship and he entered the House of Lords as a governing peer of the realm. And two, he agreed to an arranged marriage with Burleigh's 15-year-old daughter, Anne Cecil. The Queen approved and raised up William Cecil from a commoner to become Lord Burleigh, so Lord Oxford would not be marrying down by marrying his daughter. 3, Oxford publicly refused to consummate the marriage with Anne. And 4, Queen Elizabeth kept him in close attendance upon her at court. So the young new favorite quickly became the great champion of the Italian Renaissance at court. He was already the champion spear shaker at the Whitehall tilt yard. And by now he had written the first sonnet of the Elizabethan reign in the form to become known much later as the Shakespearean form. He wrote it to express his devotion to the Queen by asking himself a series of rhetorical questions. The answer to each is Elizabeth. He called it Love Thy Choice. Who first did taught thee how to sigh, alas, my heart? Who taught thy tongue the woeful words of plaint? Who filled your eyes with tears of bitter smart? Who gave thee grief and made thy joys to faint? Who first did paint with colors pale thy face? Who first did break thy sleeps of quiet rest? Who above the rest in court gave thee grace? Well, it sounds like he is in love with Elizabeth Tudor, Queen Elizabeth I of England. Now just imagine this radiant, red-haired goddess of a monarch, one of the most striking personalities in all Europe, flirting in front of the entire court with 23-year-old Lord Oxford. Elizabeth was, England's Cleopatra. She brought glamour, youth, new energy, love for the outdoors, quick wit, deep learning. She was fluent in Spanish, Latin, Italian, French, and even Greek. She was steeped in poetry. She could spar with her own ambassadors in their own languages, diplomats. Steeped in poetry, classics, the Bible, but she loved spectacle. She loved music. She loved theater. And she was still, however, her father's daughter. She was cursing like a sailor and carrying within that woman's body, as she herself put it, the heart and stomach of a king. Now, Elizabeth inspired Oxford to excel in all fields. There was music and astronomy, poetry, drama, horsemanship, jousting, history, law, botany, fashions, the Bible. List goes on and on and on. And she was attracted to him. And in the spring of 1573, an insider at the palace reported, "My Lord of Oxford is lately grown into great credit for the Queen's Majesty delighteth more in his personage and his dancing and his valiantness than any other. Mary, Queen of Scots, sent a scathing letter to Elizabeth, her cousin, accusing her directly. Even the Count of Oxford dare not cohabit with his wife, for fear of losing the favor which he hoped to receive by becoming your lover. The court gossip continued, and by one report, the Queen wooed the Earl of Oxford, but he would not fall in. At that time, he fell in. But this wasn't just some casual romance, some casual love affair. No. The Queen was turning 40. The time to produce an heir of her blood was running out. And Burleigh advised Elizabeth it was her sacred duty to bring stability to her people, to prevent civil war over succession by producing an heir to the Tudor throne. But she was understandably terrified at the thought of having an ambitious husband or some royal brat to inspire plots against her life and crown. She told an ambassador, "Princes cannot even love their children who are to succeed them." Rather famously, she insisted that England was her husband and she was England's wife. And with Burleigh's help, she was rapidly replacing the Catholic Virgin Mary with herself as the Protestant Virgin Queen in the eyes of her English subjects. So if she was going to have a child, a successor to Warehouse for the future, it would have to be very soon and very secret. Okay, the pregnancy. September 1573, Queen Elizabeth celebrated her 40th birthday at the home of Matthew Parker, her highly trusted Archbishop of Canterbury, and then she disappeared completely from public view for the next 6 months. She reappeared in March, another private visit to Parker, this time with the Earl of Oxford in tow, and then she continued her seclusion through April, May, and June in Greenwich Palace. 9. And a court member reported, "The Queen's Majesty hath been melancholy disposed a great while, for it should seem that she is troubled with weighty causes." The court moved to Richmond Palace, and on the 7th of July, 1574, Her Majesty finally emerged on her extravagant royal summer progress, described by one observer as a goddess riding in her chariot. But just before she left, Elizabeth and Oxford were overheard arguing loudly behind closed doors. And then, without warning, Oxford bolted across the channel to the continent, an unauthorized, unexplained, shocking act of apparent treason by a high-ranking member of the Elizabethan court. Even more shocking to the court was when he came back 3 weeks later. He caught up to the progress, and Queen Elizabeth gave him a warm welcome, as if nothing had ever happened. Well, all these events are part of the official record. But according to the treasonous book of sonnets, a royal son had been born. And we find the poet, him, Earl of Oxford, looking back and recording that story filled with heartbreak, tells how every morning since then he's looked at the rising sun and seen the golden eye and face of his own son, a sovereign king. Sonnet 33. Full many a glorious morning have I seen flatter the mountain tops with sovereign eye, kissing with golden face the meadows green, gilding pale streams with heavenly alchemy. Now the father's elation lasted just 1 hour before the region cloud, Elizabeth Regina, and her dark cloud of shame took the baby prince and had him hidden away. Even so my son one early morn did shine, with all triumphant splendor on my brow. But out, alack, he was but 1 hour mine. The region cloud hath masked him from me now. Well, Elizabeth had no intention of advertising this natal event. So her imperial frown cast its dark, ugly clouds of disgrace over the infant boy's godlike face, and he was hidden from the world, while her majesty went stealing away on her progress to Bristol and Bath in the west. Anon permit the basest clouds to ride with ugly wrack on his celestial face, and from the forlorn world his visage hide, stealing unseen to west with this disgrace. But what happened to this child? Who did he grow up to be? Yeah, Henry Risley, 3rd Earl Southampton. No, that's pronounced Risley. Yeah, don't you love the way the Brits spell? The evidence shows that not only was Oxford's son kept from him, but Elizabeth made him a changeling child, like the one in A Midsummer Night's Dream. And that the same boy acquired the name and the title, Henry Risley, Earl of Southampton. Far-fetched? This was royal politics at the highest level. Let's connect some dots. Early the following year, February 1575, Oxford set forth on an extended tour of France, Germany, and Italy. Before leaving, he promised the Queen in open court that if his wife Anne Cecil became pregnant, it would not be by him. And then, however, in Venice, he learned that not only had Anne become pregnant, but she had consulted with her doctor about having an abortion. She did give birth to a baby girl named Elizabeth, right after the Queen. Oxford denied he was the girl's father, and he separated from his wife for the next 6 years. He returned to Anne and the child during the Christmas season of 1581. And at the same time, the exact same time, the 7-year-old boy, Southampton, was being welcomed into Cecil House in London as a royal ward of the Queen in Burghley's custody. Coincidence? No, I don't think so. I think all the evidence shows a political deal between Oxford and Burghley. Oxford would return to his wife and publicly recognize 6-year-old Elizabeth Vere, Burghley's granddaughter, as his own child. And in return, the 7-year-old prince would be brought out of hiding and placed in Burghley's home as a royal ward. Now, it's sort of like King Oberon in A Midsummer Night's Dream, pleading with Queen Titania, who is universally regarded as Elizabeth herself. I do but beg a little changeling boy to be my henchman. Just imagine the boy, Southampton, acting in a play written by his own father in front of the Queen of England, Elizabeth, his own mother. It's pretty wild. The deal would have also stipulated that when the prince and Elizabeth Vere became teenagers, they would get married. And once they had a child, to solidify the marriage, Lord Burleigh, who is the real power behind the throne, would enable Elizabeth to name Southampton in succession as King Henry IX. And then Burleigh's granddaughter would be queen, and the once commoner chief minister would achieve royal status for his family and descendants. I mean, Burleigh, he may have been good for England. He was even better for the Cecil family. Okay. The marriage deal. We got to skip ahead 10 years now. It's 1591, and the Queen and Burleigh, thank you, Jake. And the Queen and Burleigh were pressuring. They're pressuring now 17-year-old Southampton to agree to marry Burleigh's 16-year-old granddaughter, Elizabeth Fair. And Southampton is stubbornly refusing. Why? Well, if he's going to be king, he wants to be king without the Cecils. He doesn't want to be a puppet of them. But Elizabeth can't name him next monarch without Burleigh's support. So his acceptance of the marriage deal, that's crucial. And at the same time, Oxford is writing 17 private sonnets to 17-year-old Southampton, urging him to hurry up and have a child to continue his beauty or royal bloodline. He opens the first of these sonnets in the voice of the royal we to demand increase or procreation, so the Queen's dynasty of the Tudor Rose might not die when she does. From fairest creatures, right, Southampton is the fair youth. He's also the fairest creature, most royal child. From fairest creatures we desire increase, that thereby beauty's rose might never die, but as the riper should by time decease, his tender heir might bear his memory. Now listen to him scold his son for wasting his royal blood. But thou, contracted to thine own bright eyes, feeds thy light's flame with self-substantial fuel, making a famine where abundance lies. Thyself thy foe, to thy sweet self too cruel. Now remember, don't let that sweet talk fool you. That means royal. And in the sonnets, England is the world. So we can hear Oxford plainly calling his son England's next in line prince of the new reign, the bud or the budding rightful heir of the Tudor Rose, who is niggarding or hoarding his blood, and thereby depriving his English subjects of what is due to them, namely himself. Thou that art now the world's fresh ornament, and only herald to the gaudy spring, within thine own bud buryest thy content, and tender churl makes waste in niggarding. Pity the world, or else this glutton be, to eat the world's due by the grave and thee. Now, that's tough stuff. I mean, it's certainly not romantic. He even accuses him of trying to destroy his mother's house, his roof, the house of Tudor, seeking that beauteous roof to ruinate, which to repair should be thy chief desire. Who let so fair a house fall to decay? And when nothing else works, Oxford just begs him as a father, make thee another self for love of me. Oxford also has a motto, nothing truer than truth. Oxford and Elizabeth, truth and beauty, will thrive if their if their son would stop trying to store his royal blood all for himself, or else Oxford predicts his ending will be their own. Sonnet 14. Truth and beauty shall together thrive, if from thyself to store thou wouldst convert, or else of thee, this I prognosticate, thy end is truth's and beauty's doom and date. Okay, typical kid. Won't listen to his parents. Will not marry the girl. But the parents and Lord Burleigh keep trying. And in the very next year, it's 1592, a kind of government propaganda campaign is launched, and it's suggesting Southampton as heir apparent to the crown. Burleigh's own private secretary dedicates a public poem to him, all about a selfish young man living on an island, ruled by a virgin queen. Not too subtle, I hope. He's even being touted as a possible new member of the Knights of the Garter. That's an unprecedented honor for one so young and without any visible achievements. Signifies he must be very special. And that fall, Elizabeth pays a visit to Oxford University, a rare appearance attending Southampton's graduation, and a speaker refers to him as a dynastic prince of illustrious lineage. No, not too subtle. Then the very next year, what is it, 1593, yes, for the very first time, the printed name William Shakespeare, not on one of his plays, but on a poem, on the dedication of Venus and Adonis to 19-year-old Southampton. It's a long, highly cultured narrative poem bursting with sex and sexuality and sensuality, instant bestseller. In his dedication, the author refers to himself and the poem as father and child. He calls Venus and Adonis the first heir of my invention. Now, we know that in the private sonnets, Oxford's invention refers to his newly invented double image writing, his trick method of double image writing to his royal son. Now, it also refers to his newly invented pen name, Shakespeare, suggesting a warrior shaking his spear, the spear of his pen, fighting for Southampton. He even calls him the world's hopeful expectation, the same way Prince Hal on stage, the same author has him being called the hope and expectation of our time as the future Henry V. Shakespeare is publicly calling Southampton a king. And inside the poem itself, the goddess Venus tries to seduce the young god Adonis, who will not fall in. That sounds familiar. Instead, he runs away only to be attacked and killed by a wild boar. But there's a birth. From the blood of Adonis spilled on the ground is born a purple flower, a royal flower. And Venus speaks to it as a mother to her child. How art next of blood, and 'tis thy right. Then the queen of love and beauty flies away, a goddess riding on her chariot. And that sounds familiar too. And the next year, very next year, 1594, Shakespeare strikes again. It's another long narrative poem, Rape of Lucrece. Now, the blockbuster. And now, an even more extraordinary dedication to Southampton. The love I dedicate to your lordship is without end. What I have done is yours. What I have to do is yours, being part in all I have, devoted yours. Your lordship's in all duty, William Shakespeare. Now, there's not another dedication like that one in all of Elizabethan literature. And never again will Oxford use that pen name, Shakespeare, to dedicate anything to anyone else, thereby uniquely linking Southampton to Shakespeare for all time. But the PR campaign fails to move the young Lord Southampton, who winds up paying a huge fine to his guardian, Lord Burleigh, in order not to marry his granddaughter. His rejection of a Cecil alliance, though, leaves the Queen helpless to help him, and it also signifies the start of a great power struggle behind the throne. Now, I got to roll up my sleeve a little bit for this one. We're in the 1590s, the middle 1590s. Queen is in, the big unknown is that when will the Queen die? Elizabeth is in her 60s. If she dies right now, there's going to be civil war. Who will control the succession? Who will be kingmaker? Burleigh is already grooming his son Robert Cecil to take over the government and stock it with his own people in key positions to continue the Cecil influence behind the crown. Southampton aligns himself with Robert Devereux, the brilliant, high-strung second Earl of Essex. He's several years older. He's already a great military hero. In fact, Essex is the current royal favorite. You love her? No, I don't think so. I think she's too old. But yes, it's a good question because he's acting like it to feed her insatiable vanity. He's becoming more popular than the Queen herself, which is not a very good idea. The two factions, the entrenched faction of William Cecil, William and Robert Cecil, is being challenged by a rising faction of swashbuckling young Renaissance nobles led by Essex and his boon companion, Southampton. Two factions hate each other. Only one will be left standing in the new reign to come. The earls are counting on popular acclaim for their military victories against Spain and the Pope, Catholic Spain. And surely Queen Elizabeth is going to take their side and let them shape England's future without the Cecils. But in 1598, August, William Cecil, Lord Burleigh, dies at nearly 79, and his son Robert Cecil, a short figure known for his cunning and his severely hunched back, is already principal secretary. And because of his father, he has Her Majesty's ear and her trust. The father had some principles. Son has none. Secretary's a busy bureaucrat. He's got spies at every camp. He sees all of life as a chess game to the death, and he sets a trap. He convinces the Queen to appoint Essex, Her Majesty's general of an army, to finally put down the eternal Irish rebellion. Well, Cecil knows it's an impossible assignment, and he also knows that the proud Earl will accept it. Spring 1599, Essex and Southampton leave for Ireland at the head of 15,000 soldiers, given a big send-off by crowds of cheering citizens. Over at the Curtain Playhouse, The crowd erupts, the whole audience in wild, patriotic approval at new lines inserted in Henry V. Now, by now, the public has been told that many of their favorite plays were written by that poet who wrote Venus and Adonis and the Rape of Lucrece. So, these new lines being inserted in Henry V are now expressing the personal support of that popular writer known as Shakespeare. We're now the general of our gracious empress, as in good time he may, from Ireland coming, bringing rebellion broached on his sword. How many would the peaceful city quit to welcome him? September 1599, the Irish campaign is a catastrophe. In a land of bewildering bogs and mist, the beleaguered English soldiers are outnumbered, outsmarted. The disintegrating army is tired, they're diseased, they're demoralized. And in desperation, Essex meets with the rebel leader, the Earl of Tyrone, and agrees to a truce. Back in London, Elizabeth confers with Cecil and in a fury sends back orders to break the truce, stay there, and fight on to the bitter end. Essex and Southampton defiantly board a ship, land on English soil, and ride 3 days and nights, trying furiously to get to Elizabeth and speak to her personally. They arrive at dawn at Nonsuch Palace, where the Queen has just risen from her bed. Essex barges past all the guards into the palace, pushing through the pikemen and chamber attendants, sword banging against his leg, pushing through the privy chamber into the presence chamber, and then charging right on through, without knocking, bursts into the royal bedroom. Inside is a startled old woman who has not yet put on her thick paint and wig. Her gray, wrinkled body is still half naked. Strands of hair straggle down over a wizened face. Queen is alone, defenseless, at the mercy of a wild man covered with mud, dripping with sweat, and now kneeling to kiss her hand. She smiles, pats her general on the head, and suggests calmly that he go clean up and come back when she is more properly prepared. When he's gone, she puts him under house arrest. The once great royal favorite will never see his sovereign mistress again, never. She bars Southampton from her presence. He, too, will never again see his mother, the Queen. Cecil has made all the moves, all the right ones, and now for the end game, fall 1600. Queen Elizabeth turns 67. Robert Cecil has positioned himself to choose the next monarch when she dies. The earls have become increasingly desperate. Whispers about rebellion are spreading. Rumors of a palace coup against Cecil, led by England's young nobility. Early February 1601, Southampton takes charge of planning for a surprise assault on Whitehall Palace. First move will be to capture Cecil. They'll probably have to kill him. Then Essex and Southampton will rush to see Elizabeth. They'll plead with her and she'll come to her senses and call a parliament on succession. And to avoid civil war, she'll even give up her crown. Members of the Essex faction now pay the Lord Chamberlain's acting company to give a special performance of a royal history play by Shakespeare, who, everyone knows, has dedicated his work to Southampton, co-leader of the upcoming revolt. The play is Richard II, about a real English monarch forced to give up his crown. The conspirators are brazenly using Oxford's pen name Shakespeare and the public stage for political propaganda. Globe Playhouse, a brand new scene, has been written and inserted, showing King Richard actually handing over his crown. Something being suggested for Elizabeth herself. Many of the conspirators sit right up on stage or high up behind the actors, cheering them on. And that night, Cecil sends agents summoning Essex to the palace. And once again, the proud Earl does exactly what the cunning secretary knows he will do. He defies him. He will not go. Early the following morning, Sunday, February the 7th, the Essex Rebellion. Great crowd of armed men jostles around courtyard of Essex House, itching for revolt. Cecil makes another move. He dispatches a royal delegation to interrogate the Earl, but the crowd erupts in anger and takes the delegation hostage. It's an overt act of treason. Now, there is no turning back. In a panic, Essex bolts out the gate. He's crying, "For the Queen! For the Queen!" Hundreds follow him, racing through the streets trying to get to the palace. But Cecil already has soldiers stationed at every corner and speakers already proclaiming, "Essex traitor! Essex traitor! Traitor! Traitor!" Citizens watching from windows and doorways are terrified, bewildered, and without any public support, the rebels fall into a state of confusion and chaos, followed by bloodshed and finally mass arrests, filling all the jails in London. 10 o'clock that night, Essex and Southampton sink to their knees, surrender up their swords. So-called Essex Rebellion is over before it can even begin. And that's the end of part 2. Thank you. We'll go right into it. Part 3. Disgrace. What did I tell you? They're after us. Well, we don't know if Oxford got to personally see his former brother-in-law Robert Cecil, or the Queen during those tragic hours. But I can't believe he wasn't at the palace trying to move heaven and earth for his son. It was a very difficult and emotionally demanding day, physically and emotionally. That night he returns on horseback to his home in Hackney, several miles away, and in the darkness of his room, trying to settle down and sleep, he sees a ghostly image of his son, the prince who had been the world's fresh ornament, now appearing to him as a prisoner in the tower, like a jewel hung in ghastly night. Now, up to now, I've used sonnets at random to make points, but from here on, all the sonnets addressed to Southampton are in numerical and chronological order, starting with Sonnet 27. Weary with toil, I haste me to my bed. The dear repose for limbs, with travail tired. But then begins a journey in my head to work my mind when body's works expired. For then my thoughts from far where I abide intend a zealous pilgrimage to thee, and keep my drooping eyelids open wide, looking on darkness which the blind do see. Save that my soul's imaginary sight presents thy shadow to my sightless view, and like a jewel hung in ghastly night, makes black night beauteous, and her old face new. Lo, thus by day my limbs, by night my mind, for thee and for myself no quiet find. Well, what happens to his son also happens to him. He too suffers the outcast state of a traitor. Sonnet 29. When in disgrace with fortune, and that's the Queen, and men's eyes, I all alone beweep my outcast state, and trouble deaf heaven, again Elizabeth, with my bootless cries, and look upon myself and curse my fate. The Crown formally charges Essex and Southampton with conspiring to depose and slay the Queen and subvert the government. 50-year-old Oxford, summoned to be the senior judge at the treason trial of Essex and Southampton. He grieves over the losses suffered by his son, loss of crown, loss of honor, loss of liberty, likely even the loss of his life by execution. And now all of Oxford's previous sorrows and frustrations come back upon him, as if for the very first time. Sonnet 30. When to the sessions of sweet, and there's that sweet royal word again. When to the sessions of sweet, silent thought I summon up remembrance of things past, I sigh the lack of many a thing I sought, and with old woes new wail my dear time's waste. Then can I drown an eye, unused to flow, for precious friends hid in death's stateless night, and weep afresh love's long since cancelled woe, and moan the expense of many a vanished sight. Then can I grieve at grievances foregone, and heavily from woe to woe tell o'er the sad account of forebemoaned moan, which I knew pay, as if not paid before. But if the while I think on thee, dear friend, all losses are restored, and sorrows end. The Privy Council rounds up members of the Lord Chamberlain's men and interrogates them about their performance of Richard II on the eve of the rebellion. Author is never called, but Oxford privately takes the blame for authorizing his son's treason, which he calls a fault, a trespass, and a miss, and a sin. He authorized it by depicting the overthrow of King Richard and encouraging members of the audience to compare Elizabeth with that monarch. Sonnet 35. No more be grieved at that which thou hast done. All men make faults, and even I in this, authorizing thy trespass with compare, myself corrupting, solving thy amiss, excusing thy sins more than thy sins are. Now he has to sit on the tribunal as the head judge and vote to condemn his son to death. Then it's his adverse party, and then later work behind the scenes as advocate or lawyer, trying to bring in sense or rational arguments to excuse his son's sensual fault or irrational crime. But through thy sensual fault I bring in sense. Thy adverse party is thy advocate, and against myself a lawful plea commence. It's a lawful plea to Cecil. Plea bargain for his son's life, and the bargain is harsh. Southampton must forfeit any claim as the Queen's natural heir. Oxford and Southampton must never admit and recognize their father-son relationship. Sonnet 36. Let me confess that we too must be twain, although our undivided loves are one. So shall those blots that do with me remain. Without thy help, be borne by me alone. I may not evermore acknowledge thee, lest my bewailed guilt should do thee shame. Nor thou with public kindness honor me, unless thou take that honor from thy name. But do not so. I love thee in such sort as thou being mine, mine is thy good report. His good report is this true living record of his son, as opposed to the false report of history to be written by the winners. And in the very next lines, he almost, but not quite, reveals their father-son relationship directly. Sonnet 37. As a decrepit father takes delight to see his active child do deeds of youth, so I, made lame by fortune's dearest spite, take all my comfort of thy worth and truth. February 19th, 1601, the joint trial of Essex and Southampton opens in the lofty gloom of Westminster Hall. Oxford, hereditary Lord Great Chamberlain, takes his place as highest-ranking earl on the tribunal, and Cecil has orchestrated a travesty of justice. The 25 peers are duty-bound to render a unanimous guilty verdict, and so they do. And the Lord High Steward pronounces sentence. You both shall be led from hence to the place from whence you came, and there to remain during her majesty's pleasure. From thence to be drawn upon a hurdle through the midst of the city, and so the place of execution. There to be hanged by the neck and taken down alive, your bodies to be opened and your bowels to be taken out and burned before your face, your bodies to be quartered, your heads and quarters to be disposed of at her majesty's pleasure. And so God have mercy on your souls. We haven't gotten too far, but there it is. 6 days later, executions. Because of his noble blood and high rank, Essex is spared the gruesome torture of being hanged, drawn, and quartered. Instead, he's led from his prison room to the Tower Green, where he submits his neck to the heavy blade of the executioner's axe. Now Southampton faces the same fate, unless, of course, he agrees to the bargain and gives up his royal claim. A week later, 5 conspirators are put on trial. All are quickly found guilty of high treason, sentenced to die. Southampton won't budge. A week after that, Cecil turns up the heat. 2 conspirators are publicly hanged, drawn, and quartered. Southampton still won't budge. Oxford tells the prince in Sonnet 57, I, my sovereign, watch the clock for you. Done all he can for his son. Now it's up to him. Sonnet 58, to you it doth belong, yourself to pardon of self-doing crime. He tries to fortify himself against the moment when the cruel knife of the executioner will cut the neck of his son and take his life away. In other words, I'm steeling myself because you're going to die. Sonnet 63. All those beauties whereof now he's king are vanishing or vanished out of sight. For such a time do I now fortify against confounding age's cruel knife, that he shall never cut from memory my sweet love's beauty, although my lover's life. His beauty shall in these black lines be seen, and he shall live, they shall live, and he in them still green. Elizabeth, prompted by Cecil, gives the command for more executions. All the rest are beheaded on Tower Hill, and now Southampton is the only one left. and a crowd gathers at Tower Hill the very next morning, waiting for the Earl to appear with the headsman. But they wait in vain. At the very last moment, he changes his mind and agrees to the bargain, his father's bargain, with Cecil. Now the secretary intervenes with Her Majesty. She spares her son's life. And Cecil will hold the prince hostage in the tower until she dies and King James succeeds as King of England, and losing the succession for his son, but for England. It's such a high price that Oxford has no room for rejoicing. Instead, he writes a virtual suicide note listing the reasons he wants to die. All various ways that the limping, swaying, hunchbacked secretary has defeated him and his son. Sonnet 66. Tired with all these, and these are the reasons, for restful death I cry, and right for perfection wrongfully disgraced, and strength by limping sway disabled, and art made tongue-tied by authority, and simple truth miscalled simplicity, and captive good, Southampton, attending captain ill, Cecil. Tired with all these, from these would I be gone, save that to die I leave my love alone. Will not kill himself and leave his son alone in the tower. Now all of Southampton's lands are confiscated by the crown. All his titles are stripped away, and he's reduced to the base commoner, Mr. Henry Risley, or in legal terms, the late Earl. Rival poet. Now Oxford records the permanent sacrifice of his own identity to William Shakespeare, the great poet-dramatist who dedicated his work to Southampton. He instructs his son in Sonnets 71 and 72. When I perhaps compounded am with clay, do not so much as my poor name rehearse. My name be buried where my body is, and live no more to shame, nor me, nor you. Shakespeare is the better spirit who can praise Southampton publicly, while Oxford cannot speak. Tells his son in Sonnet 80, oh, how I faint when I of you do write, knowing a better spirit doth use your name, and in the praise thereof spends all his might to make me tongue-tied, speaking of your fame. The rival poet turns out to be his own pen name, Shakespeare. The printed name William Shakespeare is now a mask glued to his face, smothering him. And the more Shakespeare is linked to Southampton, the less visible Oxford becomes. Sonnet 86. Was it his spirit, by spirits taught to write above a mortal pitch, that struck me dead? When your countenance filled up his line, then lacked I matter, that enfeebled mine. Misprision. Now Oxford records precise legal information that will never appear on the official record. The bargain with Cecil, the deal, requires silence and the permanent loss of his royal son. In return, the verdict against Southampton is reduced from treason to misprision of treason. He knew about it, but he didn't participate. And this better judgment against the great gift of his life and blood will provide the legal ground for his freedom with a royal pardon. Sonnet 87. Farewell, thou art too dear for my possessing. So thy great gift, upon misprision growing, comes home again, on better judgment making. Thus have I had thee as a dream doth flatter, in sleep a king, but waking no such matter. Prison years. February 8, 1602, Oxford records the fleeting year, the first fleeting year of Southampton's confinement, according to Her Majesty's pleasure or command. And the year did not pass quickly. Fleeting is slang for imprisoned, echoing the Fleet prison. What should have been a golden summer of royal hope was instead one long, cold winter of separation and loss. Sonnet 97. How like a winter hath my absence been from thee, the pleasure of the fleeting year. What freezings have I felt, what dark days seen, what old December's bareness everywhere. And yet this time removed was summer's time, the teeming autumn, big with rich increase, bearing the wanton burden of the prime like widowed wombs after their lord's decease. Yet this abundant issue seemed to me but hope of orphans and unfathered fruit. For summer and his pleasures wait on thee, and thou away. The very birds are mute. February 8, 1603, Oxford now records 2 full years of Southampton's imprisonment, and these cover the 3 winters, or Februaries of 1601, 02, and now February 03. 3 winters cold, he writes in Sonnet 104. 3 winters cold, since first I saw you fresh, which yet are green. 3 winters since that earlier time, when his son had been the world's fresh ornament in line of succession. Meanwhile, at Richmond Palace, Elizabeth complains of a fiendish dryness in her mouth and terrible insomnia amid reports she's suffering from hallucinations. Time is running out, and in a separate sequence of this private diary, Oxford turns in a rage against his sovereign mistress, the Dark Lady. Dark Lady is not there. But there she is, and you thought I'd never get to her. The Dark Lady, Queen Elizabeth. But she is only dark or black because of her negative attitude and actions toward their son. He tells her in Sonnet 131, in nothing art thou black, save in thy deeds. She turned their son black with disgrace from the very beginning. He was never counted royal. If he was, he never bore Elizabeth's name of tutor. But now he is still his mother's immediate heir by blood in succession, and she still slanders herself and her blood by viewing him with shame as a bastard. Sonnet 127. In the old age, black was not counted fair, or if it were, it bore not beauty's name. But now is black beauty's successive heir, and beauty slandered with a bastard shame. Before she spared their son's life, Oxford went so far as to threaten her in Sonnet 140. Do not press my tongue-tied patience with too much disdain. For if I should despair, I should grow mad, and in my madness might speak ill of thee. Now this ill-resting world is grown so bad, mad slanderers by mad ears believe it be. And even now he writes to the dying female monarch who so utterly let him down. Past cure I am. Now reason is past care, and frantic mad with ever more unrest. My thoughts and my discourse, as madmen's are, at random from the truth, vainly expressed. For I've sworn thee fair and thought thee bright, who art black as hell, as dark as night. In his final words to the queen he once loved, this deeply honest man admits that she has taken advantage of his loyalty and his trust and turned him into a bald-faced liar. Sonnet 152. And all my honest faith in thee is lost. For I've sworn deep oaths of thy deep kindness, oaths of thy love, thy truth, thy constancy, and to enlighten thee gave eyes to blindness, or made them swear against the thing they see. For I've sworn thee fair, more perjured I, to swear against the truth, so foul a lie. March 24th, 1603, Queen Elizabeth dies in her 70th year in her sleep. Robert Cecil quickly calls upon the chief nobility, including Oxford, to proclaim James the Sixth of Scotland as King James the First of England. All happened so fast, most people don't even know she's dead. Cecil claims she named James at the very end, but I doubt that because by then she had lost all power of speech. This living record is now the chronicle of wasted time. The living record of a prince is the chronicle of wasted time because the time of Elizabeth's life has expired without his succession. Because of his deal with Cecil, Oxford knows Southampton is going to be released from the Tower. He can also make some other predictions. He can see the fairest wights, his son made ruling governor of the Isle of Wight. Elizabeth was the beauty of his old rhyme, but now she is ladies dead. So he can also see lovely knights. His son finally made a Knight of the Garter. Sonnet 106. When in the chronicle of wasted time I see descriptions of the fairest wights and beauty making beautiful old rhyme in praise of ladies dead and lovely knights. For we, which now behold these present days, have eyes to wonder, lack tongues to praise. And the newly proclaimed monarch keeps his end of the bargain. James's first official act, even before he leaves Edinburgh, is to send ahead the order for Southampton's immediate freedom. Oxford exults in Sonnet 107 that his son had been supposed as forfeit to a confined doom, but is now free. Elizabeth, as I mentioned, the moon has been eclipsed. Her mortal body has succumbed, but her eternal self as a divine monarch has endured. Those who predicted civil war, they were wrong. James will be crowned amid the domestic peace guaranteed by the bargain between Robert Cecil and Edward de Vere, the Earl of Oxford, the man who was Shakespeare. The mortal moon hath her eclipse endured, and the sad augurs mock their own presage. Uncertainties now crown themselves assured, and peace proclaims olives of endless age. Well, Southampton leaves the prison, regains his honor and his freedom. Once again he looks fresh as a prince, and Oxford claims victory over his own death by means of this monument of words built for his royal son. Now with the drops of this most balmy time, my love looks fresh, and death to me subscribes, since, spite of him, I'll live in this poor rhyme, while he insults o'er dull and speechless tribes. And thou in this shalt find thy monument, when tyrants' crests and tombs of brass are spent. Let's tie up some loose ends, and here they come. May 16th, 1603, 29-year-old Southampton received his royal pardon. July 7th, became ruling governor of the Isle of Wight. July 9th, he was finally made a Knight of the Garter. 1 year later, June 24th, 1604, the Earl of Oxford died at 54 of unknown causes. There was no funeral, left no will. No one even knows for sure where he's buried. And on the same night Oxford died, agents of the Crown arrived at Southampton's house in London. They put him under arrest. They confiscated as many of his private papers as they could find and brought him back to the Tower and interrogated him all night until his release the following morning. The English government never recorded this bizarre event. We only know about it from reports by foreign ambassadors. History has never explained it. But we could figure that with his father gone, the prince was forced to agree all over again to the bargain and once more renounce his royal claim. And he lived another 20 years. He was never allowed to gain any real political power. Nonetheless, he became a popular figure in Parliament. He was often taking sides against the king. He lived with his wife and family on the Isle of Wight, ruling, in the words of one biographer, like the benevolent monarch of a tiny kingdom. He continued to expand his patronage of literature and the arts in the humanist tradition of Shakespeare and the Elizabethan age. He became a foremost leader of the Virginia Company. He was an adventurer financing voyages to the New World, and he lived long enough to learn that one of those ships, the Mayflower, had landed safely in Plymouth Harbor. Well, on this journey, I have learned to never lose sight of Oxford's personal motto, nothing truer than truth. He told his royal son in Sonnet 82, "Thou, truly fair, wert truly sympathized in true plain words by thy true telling friend." No tyranny, no false history can stand forever against the power of true plain words set down by a true telling friend. Not long after Elizabeth died, Oxford wrote a strictly business letter to his former brother-in-law, Robert Cecil, and all of a sudden from his pen came a spontaneous Shakespearean warning. But I hope truth is subject to no prescription, For truth is truth, though never so old, and time cannot make that false which was once true. And such was the solemn promise Oxford made to his royal son in that mysterious book containing Shakespeare's Treason. Or I shall live, your epitaph to make, or you survive when I unearth him rotten. From hence your memory death shall not take, although in me each part will be forgotten. Your name from hence immortal life shall have, though I once gone, all the world must die. The earth can yield me but a common grave, when you entombed men's eyes shall lie. Your monument shall be my gentle verse, which eyes not yet created shall o'erread, and tongues to be your being shall rehearse when all the breathers of this world are dead. You still shall live. Such virtue hath my pen, where breath most breathes, even in the mouths of men. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Very hot. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
I love you.
I love you. Are you leaving? Yes.
Perfect. Really perfect. Beautiful.
Thank you, dear.
Very beautiful.
Thank you.